The gospel perspective on any issue, I think, is I summarize it with 5 points. So God rules, we rebelled, God rescues or redeems, we respond, and God restores. So we can think through any issue in those terms. Creation, first of all, God rules in creation. God created male and female good. Both are good, but they are different and they're complementary. We rebelled. And we took on ourselves the right to rule ourselves and to reject God. And part of the result of that is a conflict between the sexes. You read about it even in Genesis 3, an unhealthy desire for the opposite sex or desire to rule over. And that plays both ways. So throughout history, men have often had the upper hand on that because they have the physical strength to dominate. But women have also at times used power or manipulated in a different way over men. And certainly female rulers have been potentially just as bad as male rulers in history. I don't think you could say either of us have done particularly well. So conflict between the sexes and confusion. But we must understand the nature of sin, because sometimes we focus on the behaviors, the things that we do. And yes, the Bible tells us certain things are sinful, but they flow from wrong desires, which flow from wrong beliefs, and according to Romans 1 especially, ultimately flow from wrong worship. Because we've rejected God, and instead we worship created things, which increasingly in the West means we worship ourselves or humanity and ourselves as individuals. Until we correct that, we're not going to correct the behavior. So I'm not interested in trying to make people more moral or behave right. I want them to come to recognize that the first point, God rules. Thirdly, God redeems. So we look at Jesus, and what do we learn from him about gender and identity? Well, I mean, remarkably, who is the most authentic man who has ever lived? It's Jesus. But when you look at his personality, it's not the sort of stereotypical, rugged, quiet man or whatever. It's a mixture of empathy and compassion and tenderness. But he's also celibate. He's not sexually active, which tells us that although sex, the physical dimension of sex, is part of what it is to be created male and female, it's not necessary for authentic maleness or femaleness. It's not the ultimate goal. It is to live under God, which is what Jesus teaches us, whether we're men or women. And so he dies then in our place, which dignifies our humanity. And then fourthly, we respond. And the response is that we no longer see ourselves as autonomous, self-ruling, rejecting God, but under God's authority. Jesus Christ is Lord. And when it comes to gender or any other issue, the question for me is not how do I self-actualize, how do I live out my authentic self, or how do I fight for my freedoms or my rights, but how do I learn to live under Jesus? How do I learn from him to be authentically male, authentically female? And then God restores, which is about future hope, that the conflicts between men and women and the internal conflict we sometimes have with our own gender or sexuality will one day be resolved when we are made perfectly like Jesus. And that's future, but it's also present restoration. And that happens, yes, through the Spirit indwelling me, but also as he indwells the church. So it's in community that I find support to live with attention. And we've got to get better as churches, I think, at supporting people who struggle in these areas. Recognizing that it's just part of the struggle, the same struggle that all of us have. We all struggle with internal desires and tensions. We need to learn together under God and care for one another as we do that. That's the gospel perspective, I think. God rules. We rebelled. God redeems. We respond. And God restores.